All right. Hello, everybody. I hope that we are ready to talk more about the apology. Let's see here. Slideshow. All right. Awesome. So, once again, here is this overview of the apology, kind of the different movements of it and all the significant events. It would be a good idea to get this slide memorized, to generally sort of see the structure of the apology, and that will probably prove useful for the exam. So I invite you to study this slide in a lot of detail. All right, so from last time, we distinguished the official charges against Socrates from the unofficial or slanderous charges against Socrates, which is why he thinks he's being tried, right? So these unofficial charges are distinct from the official charges, but since they can't stick them with the official charges, they just try to get them for these unofficial or these official ones, right? Um, and so, according to Socrates, their motivation, his accuser's motivation, is for these unofficial charges. Okay. And the last thing we talked about is a little bit about his method, where he finds people who claim to be wise, questions those people, and then kind of develops his own superiority, right? This is the Socratic method, where you just ask someone questions and keep getting them to say different things. And so when they say different things, they realize that they don't have coherent views. Um, we talked specifically about Socrates' back and forth with Meletus. Meletus is questioned by Socrates, right? And so that's a good example of his method in action, just like we got from the Euthyphro as well. So we can think about the Euthyphro and we can think about his conversation with Meletus as two examples of his method in practice. Okay, so here's a relevant question. Are the charges related, right? Are these charges as different as Socrates says they are? We might actually think that there's a lot of connection between them, right? So remember that the slander, the unofficial charge, is that he studies things above the sky and below the earth, right? He's a scientist. And the second thing is that he is making the worse argument the stronger, right? They accuse him of being a sophist. So those are the unofficial charges, which Socrates says are slanderous. And then there's the official charges that say that he's guilty of corrupting the youth and not believing in the gods of the city, right? So seemingly unrelated, may actually just be related. So let's consider the first unofficial charge. He busies himself studying things in the sky and below the earth. He's a scientist. So they are supposedly confusing Socrates with these thinkers who talk about natural explanations for natural phenomena rather than divine explanations for natural phenomena, right? When it's raining outside and there's a bolt of lightning, right? It's not Zeus throwing a lightning bolt from Olympus. Rather, it's some natural occurrence, right? There are natural causes for the lightning. Maybe the heat, this and that, atoms rubbing up together makes lightning happen. That's the idea. Okay, so we can see here that there's some relation between this official charge of not believing in the gods and this other charge of being a natural scientist, right? Because if the city believes in gods that cause natural events, and Socrates is accused of denying divine explanations for natural events, it may follow that Socrates actually doesn't believe in the gods that the city believes in, right? So these seem to be somewhat overlapping. It's very interesting. Um, Now let's talk about the second slanderous charge, right? He makes the worse argument into the stronger. He's being confused, or or he's being accused of being a sophist, right? And so the idea here is that sophists are people who influence young children and teach them how to be manipulative and effective politicians, right? Okay, so this seems to be related to this idea that he's corrupting the youth, right? He's being accused of being a person that goes in and teaches children certain things, right? And at the same time, he's officially being charged of corrupting the youth. So there seems to be some overlap. So when Socrates says that these things are slanderous, right? It seems like he's also got to say that these official charges are also slanderous. Okay, so thinking about the unofficial charges, we might ask ourselves, why are these things slanderous, right? So what is a slander? Slander is a false reporting, the key word there being false, right? False reporting that undermines someone's character, right? So if I accuse you of being something that's bad and you're not actually bad, but people believe me instead of you, then that's a kind of slander, right? And so Socrates is saying, look, he's talking to the jury, he's talking to the people that are accusing him, like, look, you guys are slandering me, right? You guys are deliberately spreading lies about me. So we might ask, all right, well, how is it that they are spreading lies about him? Well, maybe they're mistaken, right? Okay, maybe they don't really understand what it is that he's up to, and he's actually doing something different than what he's doing something different from what he's being accused of. Maybe that's a possibility, right? They just got it wrong. Or it could be, and I think that this is what Socrates is kind of getting at here. Socrates is saying, well, it's slanderous because the accusers don't actually understand what it is that Socrates is doing. Um, and so if they were to understand what it is that he's doing, then their real motivations would be exposed. Uh, and it would follow that maybe they would appreciate him in the city a little bit more, right? So if he's saying two, then Socrates is insulting the people that are accusing him, right? Because he's saying, look, you guys aren't smart enough to really understand what it is that I do. And so that means that you guys are slandering me, right? And so remember last time we talked about how Socrates doesn't really help out his case all that much because he keeps making fun of the people that he has to appease. And those are some example quotes there. Uh, okay, so we might wonder, okay, well, why are the slanderers motivated to slander Socrates? Um, According to Socrates, if these slanderers were accurate about what it is that he's doing, they would figure out two things, right? If they were to be honest with themselves and think about why it is that they are accusing Socrates and what it is they're accusing Socrates of, they would realize that their motivations are malicious, right? They want to accuse and criticize Socrates. But they would also come to see that Socrates is benefiting Athens by helping specific Athenians think more deeply about what it is that they claim to know. Um, so that's what it looks like to Socrates. But we might disagree, right? I mean, it may be that Socrates is wrong about his own methods. Okay, so the idea here is that these accusers are spreading all these lies about Socrates, right? Well, why? Because they're trying to undermine Socrates, because Socrates has at some point in time questioned them in public and embarrassed them. Okay, so if we agree with that, right? If we agree, okay, these guys don't understand Socrates, and Socrates is doing something a little different, Does that mean that we have to accept Socrates' methods and behaviors? Um, well, no, right? So we might reject Socrates' method. We might say that Socrates doesn't even understand his own method. And we might say that his accusers don't understand the method either. So we can say, okay, Socrates is being wrongly accused. But we can also say, look, his methods are not good ones for obtaining wisdom, right? Okay, so Socrates has to make the following claim. Central claim is that his methods, questioning people in public and embarrassing them, right, that leads to actual wisdom. So a lot of this is going to hang. Well, okay, yeah, first let's talk about what it is that Socrates actually does. Um, okay, first of all, he finds people who say that they're wise, right? So when he meets up with Euthyphro, Euthyphro says, "Hey, look, I know all about piety." Um, okay, so Socrates finds people like that. Then he examines them and questions them, right? So remember the Euthyphro, he's having this back and forth with um, with Euthyphro, and he's asking him stuff about piety. Well, eventually, it's unearthed that these people don't actually know what it is that they're talking about, right? And and that's a problem. And so what happens is once it's unearthed that they don't know what they're talking about, well, then they're embarrassed. And they're embarrassed in front of all of his followers, right? All of these young people who kind of follow him around and did stuff, kind of like Plato. So that's what he's doing. So whether or not we accept or reject the method, so that just is the method laid out clearly. Um, so, so we've got to wonder, these methods, do they get us wisdom? Could be yes, could be no. Now, it's going to be largely contingent on what we mean by wisdom. Here are some candidate definitions of wisdom, right? It could be virtue, moral goodness. That's in some ways, some places, that's what Socrates is talking about. It might be humility about virtue, right? An attitude that we take. So it's not the virtue itself, rather it's an attitude, being humble. It could be knowledge, or it could be humbleness about one's knowledge, right? So remember, he says that the craftspeople are wise. Well, why are they wise? Or he thinks that they're wise because they know a lot about their trades and their craft, right? But they lack humility about their knowledge, and so they're unwise. So it could be that wisdom is a kind of humility about what it is that we know. We might also say that it's wise to keep yourself alive as long as possible, right? We might call that practical wisdom. So maybe it's wise to not get executed. And if that's the case, then Socrates is the opposite of wise. Because why? Because Socrates is actively getting himself executed, right? He's saying all the wrong things to not get executed. So these are some candidate options for wisdom. And depending on how we define wisdom, we'll get different answers to whether or not the Socratic method gets us actual wisdom. Okay, so we might wonder about Socrates' motives. Why does he do what he does? Um, there's a lot of potential answers to that. It could be that he is authentically trying to help other people get the truth, right? To help them understand that they don't know what they claim to know. Or it could be that he just kind of gets off on undermining what people know, right? Or think that they know, that he just enjoys embarrassing people. At any rate, though, he compares himself to a gadfly, right? Or like a horsefly. So imagine horsefly chasing around this horse, right? This horse is laying down in the shade, it's relaxing, it's taking it easy, and there's this fly that keeps pestering him. And the fly says, "Come on, get going. Let's go. Let's do it." And after a while, the horse has to stand up, walk around, right? It can't be lazy or docile anymore. The idea here is that Athens or Athenians have gotten lazy with things that they claim to know, right? They're just accepting these answers to all these really important questions, but these answers aren't good. And so they need to be motivated to think more about everything. And Socrates is there to kind of help stir them up, help get them going. And so we might question, well, why is he doing that? That's just something for you to think about on your own, right? So once they accuse him of, or that not accuse him, but once they sentence him to die, he kind of goes on this little tangent about death, and he gives two possibilities. So he says, "Well, look, you guys are going to execute me, but you're really doing me a favor, right? Because death is a blessing. Why is death a blessing? Well, death is either two things. It's either a long, uninterrupted, and dreamless sleep, right? Or we get to spend eternity hanging out with people who have died before us. So, I mean, depending on the second possibility, might look a little different. Maybe you hate other people and you're an introvert, so you don't want to talk to other people, right? Uh, but he gives an argument here. So premise one, just like I said, either death is a sleep that just keeps on going, or it's a relocation of the soul such that one is spending time with other people. Okay, so if death is an uninterrupted sleep, well, then it's a blessing. Well, why? Well, because an uninterrupted sleep is the very best kind, right? We all love a long night's sleep that goes on until we want to wake up. Okay, so three, if death is a blessing, or if death is um, where we get to meet with other people who have lived before us in a kind of afterlife, well, then it's a blessing. Why? Well, because we get to, or Socrates would get to question people like um, Hector or Achilles and all of these, or Homer, all of these really great big historical figures. And he would get to do what he's already doing in Athens in the afterlife with these other people. And so it follows that death in either case is a good blessing, right? It's a good thing, death is. Now, we might wonder, uh, how might we criticize this argument? Well, we might say premise one may not be right because maybe there are other options, right? Maybe these two options aren't exhaustive, right? Maybe the afterlife is actually really, really horrible where we're tortured forever and ever, right? Okay, if that's the case, no, nobody likes that. We're not just hanging out with other people. Um, we're going to be tortured, in which case that is not a blessing because torture is not a blessing. Um, so that might be one way that we could push back on premise one. Another way we could criticize this argument is by uh, asking why is an uninterrupted sleep so good? I mean, isn't a good sleep is only good because you wake up at the end of it and you feel kind of nice, right? But if death is an eternal sleep, well, there's no waking up to think about it. So, I mean, is it really that much of a blessing? Anyway, these are some ideas about how, or objections that we could raise against Socrates' argument here. Uh, so, that's the end of the lecture. Think about the argument that we just looked at, right? Be able to reformulate it, right? Think about the structure of the dialogue and think a whole lot about the connection between the unofficial charges and the official charges.